Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Oh, wow. How long have I got, by the way? Oh, you just give me a nudge, yeah, thank you. As you can tell, my timekeeping isn't great, so I need reminding. Yeah, oh, it's lovely to see some familiar faces and people that I don't know as well. And I, you can imagine because you saw the state of me as I walked in, all flustered, and it's raining here in Bournemouth. If you're not in Bournemouth, watching from somewhere else, but I haven't got it all together. And you know what? God laughs at that because I'm just perfectly imperfect. You know what I mean? And I've just come from a counselling session of all things, which I couldn't change. But I knew I needed to be here and I was asked, and it's really important. And I stood at the back just for literally a millisecond and closed my eyes, just looked for God inside and felt this peace come over me. And that's what he gives, you know. We live in a very chaotic world. I know that I contribute to making it more chaotic. My background says that, but also I know I've got a lady who's 93 called Prue, who sort of mentors me a bit in the spiritual sense, and she's amazing. And she says she knows in her knower when things, you know, when God's kind of gives you a nudge, whether you've known him a long time or you're just on a journey, you get that different inside. And that's kind of what I felt at the back, just you're in the right place. And it's okay that you were running late and you're at something else, and that was important. And yeah, I guess I'll tell you a bit about me, but I love this because I can share so unbelievably openly about my faith journey. And I know I know in my knower that I wouldn't be here without God. And I get over years, and probably only in the last 7 or 8 years, even though I've been brought up a Christian all my life, is that living relationship with this fella called Jesus. You know, and in my prayers, I talk to him like a mate, you know, and I wouldn't say I'm the most conventional Christian. It's quite funny. I get asked to speak at Christian conferences and stuff, and I get, I still get a little bit of comparison and imposter syndrome sometimes because the stuff I get, I believe God's calling me into today isn't what I ever intended doing or ever imagined possible. And there's something that says, you know, he can do more than you could ever ask or imagine. And the lovely bit after that verse, which isn't often said, is according to his power, which is within us. And that's what we get by walking this path, a different supernatural power that can tackle anything. And to be able to share in that kind of context and talk in my Christian faith, it's lovely. And I grew up in a Christian home, which most people would think that's amazing, but it also can, for me, it put a lot of I should be a certain way type stuff on me. And that comparison sort of was birthed at a really young age, you know. I should be better. I shouldn't do the naughty things I do. I should have better thoughts. And the reality was that I'm just another person that's, you know, got imperfections and get it wrong at times. But, you know, for me, I always felt different to the people around me. I didn't understand how I could feel so uncomfortable in this kid called Emma. And I used to go to church with my mum as a kid, and I was even in like a church choir, having to wear a red robe and carry a cross down the aisle during the service. And I could still to this day remember, there's very few things I remember, but I can remember some of what they call the liturgy, the words, you know, I could recite them. And weirdly, the only other thing I remember actually that's quite technical is I did a law A level and I can remember the definition of theft. You know, so kind of a bit odd, but that's me, and I like that oddness today. And so yeah, I used to go to church. I used to play in a little church football team called FOG, Friends of God, and I just liked it because I could not have to be in church, but do something that was seen to be doing the right thing. And it was all about what other people wanted. I didn't really have a flipping clue what I wanted. or even what God's plan for my life was or anything. And in that, I went on a bit of a journey around addiction. Probably at the age of 11, it really started with food disorders. And then I found alcohol at 13. And during that time, I was still involved with church, going to church, and I used to be the dutiful daughter, agreeing to, well, it's funny, I'd always clean up the communion wine at the end of service and say that I was doing it and put all the prayer books away and all the hymn sheets and stuff. But really, I had an ulterior motive all along. It was so that I could take the goblet of wine and drink the rest that was in it. Every time, that was all I thought about through the whole service was, oh, there's not that many people here today, so there might be a bit more wine left at the end. And I'd swig it and I'd say, oh yeah, I poured it down the sink. And my vicar, I moved to Wales, and my vicar lived next door to us, and he drank a lot, you know, and he had the most amazing wine cellar, and I'd offer to feed his cat so that I could, when he used to go away a lot, and I'd go in and I'd feed the cat, do my duty, and then I would sneak down to his cellar and drink his red wine and fill it up with Rheinbiner. And this went on for years. So I'm, you know, I don't really share like this, so this is quite fun. Don't tell anyone. But no, and this was just me, you know. I just thought it was normal. I didn't really know that this obsession with alcohol had bubbled away at a very, very early age. Went to university, and it was funny because I chose my degree. I could have done a lot of different degrees, because one of my ways of escapism from Emma was to study hard, and I got offered all these degrees, and I remember going to Cardiff University, and they offered me all these different degrees, and like business studies, and I thought that was too clever. Again, I had an excuse for everything. And they offered me like sports recreation. I thought that was too energetic. And then they offered me hospitality management, and I didn't actually know what that was. So I remember saying to the lecturer sat in front of me at the table, like, what does that entail? And he said all these things about what hospitality management was. And then he said, there's wine tasting every Friday. So I grabbed the pen and signed up to a 4-year degree based on that decision. And I still didn't know I had a problem. University was just a playground, you know. I didn't join the students' union with the Christian element. I partied hard, liked every single sport going, turned my back on God, to be honest. Very promiscuous, you know. I'm not really into rugby. Well, I like rugby now, but I joined the rugby team, the golf team, the cricket team, the chess club team, the netball team, all because they were just different drinking buddies. I could have done a lot more productive things with my time. And yeah, it did get a lot worse very quickly, I'll be honest. And when I left university, in my wisdom, I went and ran nightclubs abroad, and that was my job for a while. And I don't know what that was, but basically the cycle of drinking had really taken over, and I was losing myself in that and all my morals. And I'll be honest, I didn't have much of a conscience. That's what alcohol did. It kind of blocked that out. But I think there was this niggling little voice of, this isn't where you're meant to be. You know, I have a bigger plan for your life, but you're not in it right now. And that's why, in one way, I chose that song earlier. You know, even though it's not a very familiar song, the actual words really speak to me, you know, about God having a plan for my life. And I believe that to a degree, but the more that alcohol took over and the consequences got worse, and the drink driving, the loss of friends, being unemployable by the end, you know, getting myself
into... Want a biscuit, John?
I'd love a biscuit. Sorry. I haven't had my dinner yet. You're making me hungry.
So sorry.
I'm joking. So all the consequences got worse, but I started to believe that there wasn't a plan for my life, I'll be honest, and that's when the hope started to fade. And it's a really dark place when you lose that hope that you have a future. And I'll be honest, if I had the courage at that time, I'd probably have ended my life. And there were so many things that I know now, looking back, that I was being protected, and that God had a plan for my life that wasn't going to end in the madness of addiction. And I even remember, like, I tried lots of different detoxes and things, but I don't think I was ready. I wasn't really ready to surrender to anything. And anyway, I ended up, my mum's a pharmacist, and it's funny because all my life I blamed my parents for my drinking and took no responsibility at all. And, you know, they say in the 12-step fellowship about being powerless. Obviously, I got to that point, but I did also make really bad choices. And I got to, you know, I used to say, well, my mum was a pharmacist and my dad was a managing director for Guinness. So no wonder I was like I was. And I was very blasé about it. But deep down, even though I taught the talk and had all these excuses and could be quite funny and stuff, but deep down I knew that there was something broken going on inside me, and that I couldn't fix it. And I had given up hope, and I ended up going to a rehab. And I thank God every day that I went to a 12-step rehab. You know, and I'm still involved with Alcoholics Anonymous, but you know, that for me isn't the be all and end all of everything. It's and I saw these 12 steps and they talked about God, and I started to think, I know who that is. It's a very distant memory, but there's somebody out there looking after me. And I remember praying the first prayer that I'd prayed in years, in this rehab 18 years ago now. And I'm 18 or 19, something like that. And I was 28 years old. And I said, you know, God, if you really do love me, will you help me get through this? And I didn't just leave it there, because I've got an addictive nature. I don't leave it at anything. I went, and I promise that if you help me to get through this, I'll give my all to helping others. And I didn't remember that prayer for many years. And I remembered it several years later. And he has been so true to that word, you know. I don't believe in any human power can get us through the grips of that destructive nature of addiction. You know, I believe that it's a spiritual journey. And that's why I love what I do today, because it brings in recovery with spiritual sort of paths. And anyway, so I went through rehab, and I'd love to say that I stayed sober. I didn't. And in all honesty, I wasn't really pursuing my faith route, but I started to have this little bubbling kind of inkling that God was there with me. I had no idea what it looked like, and at the time I didn't have that much intention of pursuing that. I was just more focused on, you know, regularity of meetings and this, and, you know, doing the do. And also there's that part of me that wanted to look like I'm doing everything right. But the reality was that I wasn't. There was the real piece missing for me, was that growing in a relationship with Jesus. And when I drank again 12 and a half years ago was my last drink, I ended up in the police station here in Bournemouth, having smashed up my car. I was in an absolute horrendous state, and I'd only drank for a couple of weeks, but it took me to a really dark place very quickly. And I remember leaving that police station, and they gave me some money for a bus to get home. And I went to the off license and I bought a bottle of wine and walked from here to Boscombe to my flat. And I reached out to some people I knew in the fellowship of AA and my mother, and she came down from Wales to support me. And, you know, I felt not just the love of people, but I felt this different kind of feeling that there was something that I needed to do differently. And I just said, I started praying, and it wasn't even an intentional, I'm going to pray. It just happened. And I was like, you know, I'm going to give my all to this. And I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but for today, I'm going to give my all on a daily basis, not cherry pick the recovery that's possible in places like this. And, you know, other fellowship and stuff, but to just give my all and not worry about what people thought of me. And I must admit, my circle of friends got a bit smaller, but actually the quality of people that stuck with me got bigger. And that was, I believe, like God was really kind of guiding me in that. And I started to believe that a new form of recovery was possible. And I'd always said all along I'd never, ever, ever work in this. And I think it's sensible, like it was for me, not to jump in and work in the field of recovery straight away. And I did everything to not work in the field of addiction, everything. I used to work in the college here, and my first job was in the college. I volunteered at places, but I didn't want to do that sort of work. But as I got involved with a local church, I went to a few different churches, and God's so funny. Like he's got a sense of humor, you know, in some ways. But before all that, actually, I was 6 weeks sober. So it was October 2012. And I know that some people in this room know me and know one of the biggest things that ever happened in my life. But my mum had come down to visit, knowing that I was now sober again, and I one of the things I'd planned before I had that horrendous relapse was to take her to Iceland, the country, by the way, not the frozen. I told people this once, and someone, I didn't elaborate, and someone said, "What, you took her to the frozen food store as an amends? That's a bit cheap." But no, I took her to Iceland, and we had a beautiful time. But I was really fragile, you know, and we had a lovely time chasing the Northern Lights. Never saw them. You know, when you think you see something, you actually want it so much that you think you see it. Came back to Bournemouth and my flat in Boscombe at the time, and my mum is such a faith-filled woman, and I had the most beautiful top-up of like seeing and being around this wonderful Christian lady. When we were on our way home, on the plane, she started speaking weirdly. She started, I know it sounds, I've never really remembered this, but she started talking about cheese for about an hour. And I was like, that's really odd. And I didn't know why, you know, I just thought she was hungry. Plane food's pretty bad, but anyway, we got back, and that evening she started just, there's something not right, and I couldn't place it, and I felt this like inkling in my spirit something wasn't right, and I went to sleep really unsettled that night. And she was in my bed, and I was on the sofa in this bedsit, and in the morning we woke up, and normally I'm one of these busy people. I don't get up and get on my knees and pray. I do things throughout the day. I'm just like wired up that way. I think I've only realized I'm 46 now, and I think I've got a bit of ADHD going on. But that's okay. But anyway, so I got up, and for some reason I didn't just rush around. I started talking to her. And then we were chatting, and then she suddenly just collapsed on the floor. And bearing in mind, this is a woman that helped me to get into recovery, and she's been there for so many people in addiction through her life as a family member. And literally she collapsed on the floor, and I thought she'd just fallen over something, and she hadn't. She'd had a sudden cardiac arrest in front of me. And she was lying on the floor, and she started going grey very quickly, and all the liquid was leaving her body, and the sounds, the guttural retching as she was dying in front of me. And I mean, this is, if anyone doesn't believe and they've been in that room, I don't know how you couldn't. But the day before, when we got home, there was a lady that was in the block of flats talking to me, and she was 6 weeks sober as well. And we were having a conversation about God and about how sometimes things just happen, and I don't believe in coincidence. I always say it's a God incident, and he puts people in your path at the right time, and you know, people come along and you're like, how on earth did that happen? I've had many a thing like that, but not like this. And we were having this amazing talk about higher power and God and everything. And anyway, this girl happened to be in her room that day, and it was her birthday. So there's no way she would have been at work, but because it was her birthday, her work gave her the day off. So I ran and got her, and she came in. She'd done her CPR training 2 weeks before, and we both set about doing CPR on my mum. And I was doing it to there was a advert on telly, the Vinnie Jones, staying alive, staying alive. That's so if you ever get in that situation. Weirdly, yesterday in Bournemouth High Street, I ended up nearly having to do CPR on a man that got beaten up. So it's a bit raw, but basically we were doing CPR. She was doing it to the Nelly the Elephant song. So if you know, it's quite comical in that sense, but you could hear her ribs cracking, and it was just awful. And I could see this woman I loved literally just dead in front of me. There was nothing. And the paramedics took 8 minutes to get from Bournemouth to my flat in Boscombe, not like it would be today. And basically they just came in, took over, asked us to stand back. And there was about seven people, I think, in the room. And literally I was standing back watching all this happen, and they were shocking her heart and injecting her and cutting off her clothes and all this stuff. And then I just knew that someone else was in the room. And, you know, whether you believe or not, you know, this is what I saw that day. And literally I knew someone else in the room. I couldn't tell you what they looked like, but I felt this beautiful presence in that chaotic, crazy situation. And I felt this peace just like fill me. And I just started saying the Serenity Prayer, because I kind of knew that off by heart, and I was just saying out loud the Serenity Prayer over and over again. And there's my friend who'd also done CPR with me, standing there watching this happen. And I felt so peaceful. And when the paramedic that was shocking my mum's heart turned around to me and said, you know, I'm so sorry, we can't do any more. It wasn't my voice, but this voice come out of me. And I just looked at him and I went, please, can you try one more time, in this such calm voice? And this man just looked at me, and there was this sudden like energy, like, and I know that a lot of paramedics do one more time to help the families, because they believe there's no hope, but it helps them to go through what they're going to go through in the grieving process. And he turned around and he shot my mum's heart. And I just knew that other person, I knew that was Jesus in the room with us. And he shot my mum's heart, and she started coming back to life right in front of my very eyes. And, you know, some of you have met my mum, and, you know, she's a beautiful soul. And she's alive to tell the tale today. And that was, you know, 13, 14 years ago. And you know what? I got to be a daughter to her. That's what this gave me. It wasn't about all the stuff, all the trips away, all the stuff I could do, you know. And even in life today, you know, like actually what she was she was unconscious for quite a long time. And the first thing she said to me, because of her connection with addiction and that, was like, Em, I'm powerless. And in that moment, when she came around and said that, there was this common connection. She didn't need to say much more, you know, and that for me is this language of the heart that we get by like-minded people coming together in recovery. But for me, the bonus is that we've not just got people, we've got a God who sent his son that loves us so much. And I felt that, you know, and I was able to be a daughter to her. And my relationship with Jesus really began that day, because I couldn't doubt anymore. You know, I can pull apart anything. I'm very analytical, and I couldn't doubt it. It was like that, fully surrendering to this stuff, and it was so freeing. You know, yes, I suffered post-traumatic stress. Yes, my mum's been horrendously ill since, for different reasons. But I've been able to care for her. You know, she's in hospital again next week. I literally built a home in my garage now for her. It's a proper annex, not just a garage. It's not like a sofa on the floor, you know, but it taught me in that moment that the holding back had helped, the holding back from him held me back from living out the plans he has had for my life. And I started believing, and the more I believed in him, the more I believed in what he was giving me as a mission. It was quite funny, because I went to a conference, a Christian conference, when I got really involved back with church, started running the recovery course like locally and then nationally. And I don't even know how all that happened, but I was taking this, what they called the recovery course, Christian recovery course, around the country, become a trustee with them, all that stuff. And I went to a conference where I was talking at, and I felt God say to me, I started like hearing things like, you know, voices, and like, you know, or prompts and stuff, and like saying explore further ministry. And in my naivety, and this is the thing, he's got plans for us, but what our plans are, what we think they are usually not quite what he has in store. And I often don't think God actually will show us everything, because in my humanness, I'd have run a mile. I'd have said, no way could I do all this. You know, it's in his strength, not mine. And anyway, I thought he'd said explore being a vicar, so I started going to Bible college. And I'll be honest, it wasn't for me, and I was really conflicted, because I'm like, I'm doing what you want, God, but this is really, I'm finding it so boring. I love the Bible, don't get me wrong, but I'm not someone that sits down and reads for hours. I like to watch things or hear things or listen to stuff. That's just how I'm wired up. And I'm sitting in this like lectures in an evening once a week, exhausted. They're talking about people in the Bible, like Basil the Great, and I'm like, who the heck's Basil the Great? You know, they talked about someone called Calvin, which if anyone's read well, it's not actually in the Bible. It's more about how things evolved. And I got so bored that I got on eBay and bought a Calvin Klein bag. You know, it's like, I'm not a perfect Christian by any sense of the imagination, but you know what? I laugh about that today, because he knows that I've got a sense of humor, and I'm so committed to walking as much as I can in a way that he wants, you know. And anyway, I guess, you know, for me now, I run a Christian charity, and I pinch myself, how did that happen? I've got a staff team of 7. We train churches to run addiction work nationally, and that's only in the last 5 years. You know, I go into work and I pinch myself that I'm heading up that sort of stuff. You know, I think about 18 years ago, I couldn't be in a room with more than 2 people out of fear of anxiety, let alone speak to anyone. You know, I believe God called me to speak at things, and I spoke at a conference with 1,700 women in London a couple of years ago. And the funny thing is, I still doubted myself, you know, and that's okay. And I started, you know, I thought I'd do the right Christian thing. I'll watch some people talking about comparison that are preaching. And I'm watching this amazing American woman called Nona Jones, who is phenomenal, and she's amazing. And I'm watching her thinking, my gosh, this is really speaking to me. It makes sense. And, you know, like, God doesn't want us to compare. He's made us all so beautifully individual, flaws and all, the good, you know, the not so good. But, you know, it's about our hearts. When we turn our hearts towards him, you know, anything's possible. And anyway, I'm watching this woman, and then I looked at the flyer that was sort of like going around about this conference, and I'm on the front of it. Lo and behold, the woman next to me, who's also one of the main speakers, was Nona Jones. And she preached at the conference about comparison. I'm like, that is hilarious. And I even started my talk about that, saying, you know, like, you know, and I get nervous, but that's because this stuff means something to me today. The things that God gives, you can't even quantify them. You can't even put it into words, you know. But it's a continual journey, you know. I have to continually, I believe, like, he sets you free, but I do believe there's an element of yes, freedom from the desire to go to addiction, but I do believe like giving back, helping people, and being vigilant is really important. You know, I've had many a conversation with people who walk into a church, boom, they get hit by the Spirit, and they never have the compulsion or thought about addiction again. You know, that hasn't been my story. You know, I needed intervention, but ultimately it's like coming to the same destination but through different routes. And I've tried to stop comparing my journey with other people's, you know. And I know that I'm loved. I've never had a dad. I've been, you know, never had positive male role models, you know, and I know I can share openly, but about 3 months ago, I found out that my granddad, who I loved with all my heart, had abused my mom and stuff, you know. But I can forgive today. I'm actually going back this weekend to visit my auntie who's in hospital with my mom, and I'm going to go to the grave and spend a bit of time and forgive, because, you know, that's what I'm called to do. I'm in the business of forgiveness because that's what I'm taught, you know, from him. You know, I love my life. I know there's room for improvement, but again, I just keep turning every day. I turn my face to him in one way, shape, or form. You know, I used to struggle with prayer, but but now it's like a daily part of my life, whether it be listening to a worship song in the car, obviously with my eyes open today. But you know, it's not necessarily a conventional way, but it's what works for me. And he delights in that, because all he wants is us to have our hearts turned towards him, forgive, make right stuff, and carry the message that there is often people that maybe don't believe in hope, but if they turn to him, they'll get that in how it's meant to. How long have I got? Good. Is that about right? Wonderful. I hope you got something out of that. And even just the minute I started speaking, I mean, even if you didn't hear a word I said, hopefully you can see that a peace came over me while I was talking. And that's only him, because I am not the most peaceful person. But when I'm doing something and focusing on God, then peace can't not be there, you know. And I know he'll be with me in my mum's operation next week. You know, I nearly lost her last time she had an operation. And I'm going with a Christian lady I know, and we're just going to wander around Salisbury during the day and pray. And, you know, and every day I just want to do the best by him. And if I get it wrong, that's okay too. The problem I have is, you know, stopping those patterns of making the same mistakes, because for me that dishonors God. It's about doing stuff different. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.